It's to Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, who is live at the White House, that we turn to for those details. So, Tyler, obviously there's a number of things here based on our reporting. How likely is the administration to acquiesce to what China wants?
Ishiba Shigeru has survived as Japan's Prime Minister after its parliament appointed him to stay on. This is what he said after the results came in.
Could one bold tax decree shatter a decades-long alliance in a heartbeat? In 2025, the United States stunned Japan with steep tariffs on its goods, sparking a trade clash that threatens to unravel their historic bond. But Tokyo isn't backing down. Japan is now eyeing a partnership with Canada to reroute its auto exports in a move that could reshape regional dynamics. This strategy could cost the U.S. $17 billion in lost trade. How will Japan fight back against this shock? Japan is bracing for a significant economic blow following Washington's latest tariff move. Early estimates suggest the country could lose up to $17 billion in auto exports to the U.S. within the first year, a 28% drop compared to 2024. Meanwhile, American consumers may face an average price hike of $1,600 per vehicle as manufacturers pass on the added cost of tariffs. Should Tokyo choose to retaliate with tariffs on agriculture, U.S. farmers could suffer losses of up to $2 billion, particularly in beef, pork, and grain exports. In April 2025, the United States unleashed a trade bombshell that sent shockwaves through its oldest Pacific ally, Japan. With a single announcement, the White House imposed a 25% tariff on all Japanese automobiles and a 10% tariff on most other goods, excluding energy products. This abrupt decision rocked global markets and ignited outrage in Tokyo, where leaders saw it as a direct assault on a hard-won trade pact from 2019. Japan, a nation built on trust in its alliances, now faced a stark betrayal that threatened its economic core. The 2019 U.S. Japan trade agreement was more than a contract, it was a promise. After intense negotiations, the deal aimed to shield Japan's vital auto industry from punitive tariffs while fostering fair trade. Its language emphasized mutual respect and cooperation to avoid barriers, particularly for cars, Japan's economic lifeline. Although the agreement lacked an explicit no-tariff clause, Tokyo believed it secured an understanding that America would refrain from such aggressive moves. The new tariffs shattered that belief. Japanese officials labeled the policy a violation of the deal's spirit, accusing the U.S. of trampling on years of goodwill. At the heart of this clash lies Japan's auto industry, a powerhouse that drives its economy. Over 1.7 million vehicles roll off Japanese assembly lines yearly, bound for American showrooms, fueling jobs and growth. Companies like Toyota, Honda, and Nissan export to the U.S. valued at billions annually. A 25% tariff spikes the price of every car, making them less competitive against domestic models. Early estimates suggest this could slash Japan's auto exports by nearly a third, a blow that could ripple through factories, ports, and small businesses across the nation. The political sting cuts even deeper. For over 6 decades, Japan has stood as America's steadfast partner, hosting 54,000 U.S. troops and sharing goals in technology, security, and global stability. This alliance, cemented by mutual trust, now faces a fracture. In Tokyo's halls of power, the tariffs were not just an economic jab, but a signal of disregard. Japan's foreign ministry issued a rare public rebuke, calling the move a reckless breach of faith. Editorials in major newspapers echoed this sentiment, warning that America's actions could erode the foundation of a partnership that has shaped the Pacific's peace. The timing of the tariffs added fuel to the fire. President Trump, newly returned to office, framed the policy as a fix for America's trade deficit. Yet, experts quickly challenged this claim. Japan already manufactures half of its U.S.-sold cars in American factories, employing thousands of people stateside. The trade gap with Japan had been narrowing, and analysts argued the tariffs might backfire, raising costs for U.S. businesses reliant on Japanese parts. Instead of boosting jobs, the policy risks inflation and factory slowdowns, hitting American workers and consumers. Global markets felt the tremor immediately. The Japanese yen surged briefly, a sign of investor unease, while stocks of automakers like Nissan plummeted by double digits. Economists issued grim forecasts. Japan's GDP could shrink by 0.3% and America's by 0.15% if the dispute continues. Beyond numbers, the tariffs threaten to disrupt global supply chains. U.S. firms that depend on Japanese components, from electronics to machinery, now face higher costs, which could cascade to shoppers. Japan's response was swift and resolute. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba declared the tariffs a national challenge, rallying his cabinet for action. Trade officials, business leaders, and lawmakers convened to map out a defense of Japan's economy. Unlike past disputes, Tokyo refused to absorb the blow quietly. The nation's leaders vowed to protect their interests while upholding fair trade principles, signaling a fight that would resonate. But Japan's defiance is just the beginning. The nation is gearing up for a bold counter-strategy. Japan faced a defining moment when the United States unleashed its tariff onslaught in April 2025. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba stepped forward with a clear message. Japan would not yield to pressure. Instead of panic or hasty concessions, he unveiled a bold three-pronged strategy rooted in diplomacy, legal action, and economic resilience. This approach was not merely a reaction but a calculated plan to safeguard Japan's national interests, uphold its global standing, and chart a path through the storm. Ishiba's leadership signaled a nation determined to protect its economy and dignity, undeterred by Washington's unpredictable trade tactics. The first pillar of Ishiba's strategy was diplomacy, a deliberate effort to rally international support and reinforce Japan's position as a champion of fair trade. Recognizing the tariffs as a threat to Japan and the global economic order, Ishiba directed his foreign ministry to engage allies and partners worldwide. Japanese diplomats flew to capitals across Europe, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, holding urgent talks with trade officials and economic leaders. Within the G7, Japan pressed for discussions on the tariffs' destabilizing effects, framing them as a challenge to shared values of open commerce. Japanese representatives at the International Monetary Fund's spring meetings underscored the need for collective action to preserve trade stability. These efforts aimed to build a coalition that could pressure the United States to reconsider its stance while showcasing Japan's commitment to multilateral cooperation. This diplomatic push was strategic and nuanced. Japan avoided confrontational rhetoric, instead emphasizing dialogue and principle. In meetings with European Union counterparts, Japanese envoys highlighted the risk of a tariff domino effect, where other nations might adopt similar protectionist measures, unraveling decades of trade agreements. Japan strengthened ties with ASEAN nations in Southeast Asia, promoting itself as a reliable partner amid global uncertainty. These conversations were about sympathy and forging practical alliances to counterbalance U.S. influence. By positioning itself as a defender of rules-based trade, Japan gained moral authority and diplomatic leverage, setting the stage for broader resistance to unilateral policies. The second pillar was legal action, a calculated move to challenge the tariffs through international law. Japan swiftly prepared a case for the World Trade Organization, quietly signaling its refusal to accept America's actions. Teams from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry worked tirelessly to craft a robust argument. The core of Japan's complaint was that the U.S. tariffs lacked justification under global trade rules. The American claim of national security as a basis for the tariffs was deemed flimsy, given the absence of any apparent threat from Japanese cars or goods. Japan argued that such a vague excuse could erode the WTO's authority, allowing any nation to impose tariffs without scrutiny. This legal battle was not just about economics. It was about defending the integrity of the global trade system. Japan's approach to the WTO case was meticulous. Legal experts gathered evidence showing that the tariffs disproportionately harmed a key ally, undermining the security the U.S. claimed to protect. They pointed to the 2019 U.S. Japan trade agreement, which fostered cooperation in the automotive trade, as proof of America's broken commitment. Japan also drew on historical precedents, referencing past WTO rulings against similar overreaches. By pursuing this path, Japan demonstrated restraint, choosing arbitration over escalation. The move resonated globally, with several WTO members, including smaller economies, voicing support for Japan's stand, seeing it as a defense of their trade right. The third pillar, economic resilience, was the backbone of Ishiba's long-term vision. Rather than relying solely on external solutions, Japan turned inward to fortify its economy against the tariff shock. The government launched initiatives to bolster domestic industries, particularly those hit hardest by the U.S. measures. Subsidies and tax breaks were rolled out to support small and medium-sized enterprises in the automotive sector, helping them weather the storm. Investments in advanced manufacturing such as robotics and electric vehicle components were accelerated to keep Japan competitive. These efforts aimed to reduce vulnerability to external disruptions while positioning Japan as a leader in next-generation technologies. Beyond domestic measures, Japan pursued trade diversification to lessen its reliance on the U.S. market. The government encouraged businesses to explore opportunities in emerging markets, particularly Southeast Asia and the Middle East. Trade delegations were dispatched to countries like Vietnam and the United Arab Emirates, where demand for Japanese goods grew. New incentives supported companies in building factories abroad, spreading risk across multiple regions. This shift was about survival and reimagining Japan's role in a rapidly changing global economy, one less tethered to a single dominant partner. Ishiba's strategy was as much about politics as it was about policy. In addressing Japan's diet, he framed the tariffs as a test of national resolve, urging unity across political divides. His speeches carried a tone of calm determination, blending pragmatism with pride. He reassured citizens that Japan would not compromise its sovereignty or values, resonating deeply in a nation wary of external pressure. Public opinion rallied behind him, with surveys showing over 80% approval for his firm stance. Business leaders from automakers to tech firms praised the government's clarity, even as they grappled with immediate challenges. The strategy also reflected a broader philosophy of governance, led by a seasoned leader who deeply understands Japan's history. He drew on lessons from past trade disputes, such as the 1980s tensions with the U.S. over autos. He understood that short-term concessions could lead to long-term weaknesses, potentially locking Japan into unfavorable terms. Instead, he advocated for patience and precision, ensuring that every move strengthened Japan's position. This approach earned him respect as a leader who could navigate crises without sacrificing principles. Internationally, Ishiba's plan drew admiration for its balance of strength and restraint. Commentators in global media noted Japan's ability to confront a superpower without resorting to reckless countermeasures. Wary of similar U.S. tactics, European trade officials privately encouraged Japan to press forward, seeing its WTO case as a potential bulwark against protectionism. In Asia, nations like Singapore and Thailand viewed Japan's outreach as stabilizing, reinforcing regional cooperation during uncertainty. This global goodwill enhanced Japan's influence, proving that a mid-sized power could wield significant clout through brilliant statecraft. The diplomatic pillar extended beyond formal talks. Japan leveraged cultural and economic soft power to bolster its case. Trade fairs showcasing Japanese innovation, from hybrid vehicles to renewable energy tech, were held in key partner countries, subtly reinforcing Japan's value as a global partner. Academic exchanges and business summits further deepened ties, creating networks that could outlast the current crisis. These efforts underscore Japan's commitment to building bridges, not walls, in contrast to America's confrontational posture. On the economic front, Japan's focus on resilience went beyond immediate relief. The government launched a national campaign to promote economic security, encouraging firms to diversify supply chains and invest in critical technologies like semiconductors. This aligned with Japan's 2024 Economic Security Promotion Act, prioritizing self-sufficiency in strategic sectors. By linking the tariff response to broader national goals, Japan turned a crisis into an opportunity for structural reform, positioning itself for a more autonomous future. The legal pillar, meanwhile, served as a public statement of Japan's values. Japan contrasted its rule-abiding approach with America's unilateralism by taking the high road through the WTO. This stance appealed to the anti-Trump audience, who saw in Japan a defender of fairness against erratic policymaking. The case also galvanized domestic support, as citizens rallied around Japan, standing tall on the world stage. Lawmakers across parties endorsed the effort, framing it as a matter of national pride. Ishiba's strategy was not without risks. Diplomacy required delicate balancing to avoid alienating the U.S., a key security ally. The WTO case could take years, testing public patience. Economic diversification demanded significant resources with no guarantee of immediate returns. Yet Ishiba's measured approach mitigated these challenges, blending urgency with foresight. His leadership transformed a moment of vulnerability into a showcase of Japan's resilience and resolve. A critical piece of this resilience lies in forging new trade partnerships. Japan's subsequent moves would take it closer to allies old and new, reshaping its economic future. Faced with America's punishing tariffs, Japan refused to be cornered. In a bold move to shield its economy, Tokyo turned to Canada, China, and South Korea, forging deeper trade ties to reduce its reliance on the unpredictable U.S. market. These partnerships, built on practical energy, technology, and supply chain agreements, marked a strategic pivot. Under Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba's leadership, Japan transformed a trade crisis into an opportunity, crafting a more diverse and resilient economic future while sending a clear message: it would not bend to Washington's pressure. The partnership with Canada emerged as a cornerstone of Japan's strategy. In February 2025, high-level talks in Ottawa culminated in a landmark agreement focused on liquefied natural gas, or LNG. This deal secured a steady supply of Canadian LNG to power Japan's energy-intensive industries, reducing dependence on volatile U.S. energy markets. Beyond fuel, the agreement included cooperation in clean energy technologies such as hydrogen production, aligning with Japan's goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. Financial collaboration also took center stage, with both nations pledging to stabilize currency markets and support cross-border investments. Wary of U.S. trade unpredictability, Canada saw Japan as a reliable partner eager to diversify its economic ties. This collaboration was more than a quick fix. Japan leveraged Canada's vast natural resources and stable governance to anchor its energy security, a critical need as global markets fluctuated. The agreement also opened doors for Japanese firms to invest in Canadian tech hubs, particularly in artificial intelligence and renewable energy. Trade missions facilitated by both governments encouraged small businesses to explore joint ventures, fostering innovation and job creation. By prioritizing mutual benefits, Japan and Canada laid the foundation for a partnership that could withstand external shocks, proving that strategic alliances could thrive even in turbulent times. Simultaneously, Japan revitalized its economic ties with China and South Korea through a trilateral framework that underscored regional unity. In March 2025, a summit in Seoul reignited talks on a long-stalled free trade agreement among the three nations. This dialogue, dormant for years due to political tensions, gained new urgency as all three sought to counter U.S. trade disruptions. Discussions focused on harmonizing technology standards, particularly for semiconductors and 5G networks, critical components of modern economies. Environmental cooperation was also prominent, with commitments to share green manufacturing techniques and reduce regional carbon emissions. The trilateral partnership extended to logistics and supply chains, areas hit hard by global trade frictions. Japan, China, and South Korea agreed to streamline port operations and invest in digital tracking systems to ensure smoother trade flows. These measures aim to protect industries like electronics and automotive parts, which rely on seamless cross-border movement. Japan's leadership in this effort was deliberate, signaling its commitment to regional stability without aligning exclusively with any single power. By fostering cooperation, Tokyo positioned itself as a mediator, balancing economic pragmatism with geopolitical finesse. These new trade ties were not about replacing the United States, but building alternatives. Japan's economy, heavily tied to American markets for decades, faced risks from overdependence. The tariffs exposed this vulnerability, prompting Tokyo to diversify its export destinations and supply sources. For instance, Japanese automakers began targeting Canada's growing electric vehicle market, while tech firms explored South Korea's demand for advanced machinery. With its vast consumer base, China offered new opportunities for growth. Opportunities for Japanese consumer goods, from appliances to cosmetics. This diversification reduced Japan's exposure to U.S. policy swings, ensuring stability even if tensions persisted. The agreements were grounded in practical outcomes. Japan's trade ministry allocated funds to support companies entering these markets, offering market research and logistics subsidies. Business federations organized forums to connect Japanese firms with Canadian, Chinese, and Korean partners, fostering deals in sectors like robotics and biotechnology. These efforts were backed by data. Japan's trade with Canada grew by 12% in early 2025, while exports to China and South Korea saw steady increases. Such figures underscored the tangible benefits of Japan's pivot, proving that strategic outreach could yield results even in a crisis. This shift carried broader implications. By strengthening ties with Canada, China, and South Korea, Japan challenged the notion that it could be isolated by U.S. pressure. The partnership sent a message to Washington. Japan was not a passive player, but a global economic force with options. This resonated with the anti-Trump audience, who saw Japan's defiance as a stand against unilateralism. At home, the public rallied behind the strategy, with polls showing strong support for Shiba's efforts to secure new markets. Businesses, from small suppliers to corporate giants, welcomed the government's proactive role, viewing it as a lifeline amid uncertainty. Japan's pivot was not without challenges. Coordinating with China and South Korea required navigating historical tensions and differing economic priorities. Canada's regulatory landscape posed hurdles for Japanese firms unfamiliar with its market. Yet, Tokyo's careful diplomacy and focus on shared interests mitigated these risks. Japan built trust with its partners by emphasizing practical cooperation over political grandstanding, laying the groundwork for lasting economic ties. This strategic outreach marked a turning point. Japan was no longer reacting to the tariffs. It was reshaping its economic destiny with confidence and foresight. Yet, Japan's response extended beyond new trade partners. It was also prepared to challenge tariffs through the global legal system. The tariff clash between the United States and Japan has sparked more than economic turmoil. It has cracked the foundation of trust between the two cornerstone allies. For decades, their partnership has anchored peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific, blending economic strength with a shared commitment to stability. Yet, America's sudden trade barriers have shadowed this bond, raising alarms about the region's security and economic framework. As mistrust grows, rival powers stand ready to exploit the rift, threatening the delicate balance that has defined the Indo-Pacific for generations. Japan now questions the reliability of its closest partner. The tariffs imposed without warning signal a shift in how America values its allies. This betrayal stings beyond trade disputes, seeping into diplomacy where predictability is vital. Tokyo's leaders worry that if Washington can so easily disrupt economic ties, it might falter in a geopolitical crisis. This uncertainty forces Japan to rethink its strategic calculations, weighing how much it can lean on a partner whose actions seem driven by impulse rather than principle. The Indo-Pacific relies on a network of alliances with the U.S. Japan partnership at its heart. This bond supports everything from maritime security to economic cooperation, ensuring a rules-based order that benefits regional nations. When one ally acts alone, as America has done, it sends ripples of doubt to others. Countries like Australia, South Korea, and Singapore, which depend on this network, now watch closely. If the U.S. can strain ties with Japan, a trusted partner, what prevents similar moves against them? This fear erodes the confidence needed for collective action, weakening the region's ability to address shared challenges. Geopolitical rivals see an opportunity in this discord. Powers seeking to expand their influence in the Indo-Pacific could exploit the tension to sow division. A fractured U.S.-Japan alliance creates space for others to challenge the status quo through economic leverage or territorial ambitions. A hotspot of competing claims, the South China Sea, could see bolder moves if regional unity falters. Smaller nations caught between great powers might feel pressured to realign, undermining the cooperative spirit that has kept conflicts at bay. The strain also complicates critical security efforts. Coordinated responses to flashpoints like the Taiwan Strait or North Korea's provocations require seamless trust between Washington and Tokyo. Economic friction disrupts this harmony, making joint planning harder. Intelligence sharing, military exercises, and diplomatic alignment all suffer when allies question each other's commitment. The perception that America might prioritize short-term gains over long-term partnerships dims the resolve to face these high-stakes challenges, leaving the region more vulnerable. Public sentiment in Japan reflects this growing unease. Citizens long accustomed to viewing the U.S. as a reliable ally now express skepticism. Opinion polls show a dip in trust, with many wondering if America still sees Japan as an equal partner. This shift matters in a democracy where public support shapes policy. Lawmakers in Tokyo face pressure to pursue more independent paths, a trend that could reshape Japan's regional role. Despite this strain, Japan remains steadfast, refusing to trade its defense commitments for trade concessions, prioritizing the U.S.-Japan security alliance. While the alliance remains intact, its emotional and political glue is weakening, risking lasting damage. America's global standing takes a hit as well. Allies worldwide note the ease with which Washington sidelined a key partner. This fuels doubts about U.S. reliability, prompting nations to hedge their bets. Some may seek closer ties with other powers or invest in self-reliance, diluting America's influence. For an audience critical of Trump's policies, this misstep highlights a pattern of reckless unilateralism, alienating friends and emboldening rivals at a time when unity is crucial. The Indo-Pacific stability hangs in the balance. A weakened U.S.-Japan bond threatens the frameworks that counter regional threats and drive economic growth. Restoring trust will demand more than words. It requires concrete steps to rebuild faith in shared goals. Japan has turned to a bold, long-term vision to navigate this crisis. Its next steps aim to secure its future with ambition and resolve. America's tariffs thrust Japan into a challenging position, yet Prime Minister Ishiba's leadership has driven a robust response through a multifaceted strategy. Japan has stood firm, leveraging diplomacy, legal action, and new trade partnerships to protect its interests and assert its global role. Japan has crafted a three-phase plan to counter the tariff crisis, starting with short-term business support, followed by mid-term tech investments, and aiming for long-term economic independence from the U.S. This strategy seeks to build a stronger, self-reliant economy, ensuring Japan's global influence endures. This crisis transcends economics, serving as a critical test of the U.S.-Japan alliance. The erosion of trust and threats to Indo-Pacific stability highlight the stakes, as weakened alliances could embolden rivals and disrupt regional security. Both nations must seek urgent solutions to rebuild trust and cooperation. Without swift action, the rift risks lasting harm to the Indo-Pacific and the global order, demanding commitment to shared goals and mutual respect.